In 1917, King George V changed his family's name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor. The official given reason was anti-German sentiment during the First World War. British subjects were uncomfortable with their monarch bearing a German surname while British soldiers died fighting German armies. In 1918, the House of Habsburg-Lorraine quietly became simply Habsburg, dropping the Lorraine designation that had been part of their title since 1780. The reason given was administrative simplification after the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed. In 1917, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated. The Romanov name, which had ruled Russia for 300 years, disappeared from political power. The official story is revolution, Bolshevism, execution in a basement in Yekaterinburg in July 1918. 3 royal houses, 3 name changes or eliminations, same decade. Officially, 3 separate events with 3 separate causes. Now here is the question nobody asks in standard history courses. Why did the 3 most powerful royal families in Europe, families whose lineages and naming conventions had remained stable for centuries, all simultaneously decide that their names needed to change or disappear in the same 7-year window? The standard answer is war and revolution. The Great War destabilized everything. Old empires fell. New nations emerged. Names changed because the world changed. That answer is not wrong, but it is incomplete, because when you look at what else happened between 1914 and 1921, when you map the financial mechanisms that were put in place during and immediately after the war, a different pattern emerges. Not a conspiracy, a structural transformation. The dismantling of one system of power and the installation of another, and the royal name changes were not incidental to that transformation. They were essential to it. Let us start with what these families controlled before the names changed. The House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, the family that became the Windsors, controlled more than Britain. Queen Victoria married Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in 1840 and placed her descendants on thrones across Europe. By 1914, her grandchildren included the German Kaiser, the Russian Tsar, and the kings of Norway, Spain, and Romania. A network of interlocking claims on territory, resources, and tax revenue across the continent. The Romanovs controlled the largest land empire in the world. Russia stretched from the Baltic to the Pacific, 11 time zones, 125 million people. Timber, wheat, oil, gold, coal. The Romanovs owned it in the feudal sense. The land, the minerals, the agricultural output. The Habsburgs controlled Central Europe's industrial heartland through Austria-Hungary, steel mills in Bohemia, grain in Hungary, the Danube trade routes, railways connecting Vienna to Trieste, Prague to Budapest. Remove the Habsburgs and the map of Europe stops making sense. These 3 families together controlled or influenced roughly 40% of Europe's population and more than half of its productive capacity in 1914. By 1921, all 3 were either gone or operating under new names with radically reduced claims. The mechanism by which this happened is usually described as political. The war, the revolutions, the treaties. But political events do not happen in a vacuum. They happen in an economic context. And the economic context of 1914 to 1921 was the most dramatic restructuring of global finance since the creation of banking itself. Here is what changed. Before 1914, currency was backed by gold. The amount of money a country could issue was limited by its gold reserves. This created a natural check on government spending. The royal families held enormous quantities of gold, not just in central bank vaults, in private reserves, in palaces. The accounting was deliberately opaque. But estimates for the Romanov family alone range from 400 to 1,500 metric tons of private gold. At 1914 prices, that was worth between $160 million and $600 million. In current dollars, between $4 billion and $15 billion held by one family. The Habsburgs and the Windsors held comparable reserves, though the exact figures are, again, not transparently documented in ways that modern auditors would accept. Now here is what happened to those reserves during and immediately after the war. The Russian Imperial Gold Reserve, the State Reserve, was seized by the Bolsheviks in 1918. What happened to the Romanov family's private reserves is less clear. Some of it was smuggled out by loyalists. Some of it was captured. Some of it disappeared into accounts in Switzerland, London, and New York that were later disputed in legal battles that stretched into the 1960s. But the key point is this. The gold that had been under the control of the Romanov family, whether it stayed in Russia or left, was no longer under their control as Romanovs. It was dispersed. The Habsburg gold reserves were absorbed into the successor states of the Austro-Hungarian Empire: Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. The legal claims to those reserves were contested for decades. The family kept some, the new governments kept some. But the unified control, the ability of one family to leverage a continent-spanning gold reserve as political power, was broken. The British royal family's reserves were not seized. But in 1917, the same year George V changed the family name to Windsor, the British government quietly took over full management of the civil list, the funding mechanism for the monarchy. Before 1917, the monarch had significant discretionary control over royal finances. After 1917, that control was transferred to Parliament. The change was framed as wartime austerity, a symbolic gesture of shared sacrifice. But the mechanism it created was permanent. The Crown's finances became transparent, managed and subject to oversight in ways they had not been before. 3 families, 3 different mechanisms, same result. The private financial power of the royal houses was either eliminated or brought under the control of new institutions. And those new institutions were central banks operating under a new model. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913. The Bank of England was restructured in 1914 and 1919 to manage war debt. The Reichsbank was reorganized in 1919. Central banks in the Habsburg successor states were created in 1919 and 1920. All of these institutions had one thing in common. They managed currency issuance not based on gold reserves held by monarchies, but based on government debt instruments, bonds, which could be issued, bought, sold, and leveraged in ways that gold could not. This was not a secret. This was deliberate policy, openly discussed by economists and central bankers of the period. The war had required levels of spending that gold-backed currency could not support. Governments needed to borrow and spend on a scale that was incompatible with the old system, so the system was changed. But changing the system required removing the old system's power centers. And the old system's power centers were families whose wealth was held in forms, gold, land titles, hereditary claims that the new financial instruments could not easily access or control. The name changes matter because names are legal entities. When the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha became the House of Windsor, it was not just a symbolic gesture, it was a legal reorganization. Old claims held under the old name had to be re-registered under the new name. Some were not. The ones that were not re-registered became legally ambiguous. Ambiguous claims are easier to contest, to absorb, to redirect. The same process happened with the Habsburg properties. When Austria-Hungary dissolved, the legal entity that held certain lands and titles was the House of Habsburg-Lorraine. When that designation was simplified to Habsburg, some of the Lorraine-era claims became legally unclear. Unclear claims, again, are easier for new governments to absorb. The Romanov case is more dramatic because the family was eliminated entirely, but the legal mechanism is the same. The entity called the House of Romanov held claims. When the entity ceased to exist, the claims became available for reassignment. This is not speculation. This is how property law works when sovereigns fall. What is unusual is how cleanly it happened across 3 different political systems: monarchical Britain, imperial Russia, and the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary, in the same narrow time frame. Now let us talk about what replaced them. The new system, the system of central bank managed fiat currency, backed by government debt, required a new kind of power structure. Not monarchies with hereditary claims and private gold reserves. Institutions with transparent balance sheets, legal continuity, and the ability to issue debt instruments that could be traded internationally. The entities that filled this role were new institutions, but when you look at who sat on the boards of central banks created or reorganized between 1913 and 1921, you find something interesting. Families with long histories in banking, the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, the Morgans, families who had been financial advisors to monarchies but were not themselves monarchs, families whose power came from managing money, not inheriting land. These families did not seize power, they were invited in. Governments needing to issue billions in war bonds needed people who knew how to structure debt and create markets for those instruments, and those people, once in, did not leave. The Bank of England's restructuring in 1919 placed financial management in the hands of professional bankers, not royal appointees. The Federal Reserve, from its creation in 1913, was run by a board that included representatives of major private banks. The new central banks of the post-Habsburg states were capitalized with private investment from banking syndicates. And this was presented as modernization, democratic accountability, professionalization, and in some ways it was. But it was also a transfer of power, from families whose authority came from inherited titles to families whose authority came from controlling the mechanisms of credit and debt. The name changes of the royal houses obscured this transfer. Because if the story is that the Romanovs fell to revolution, the Habsburgs fell to defeat, and the Windsors wisely adapted by anglicizing their name, then the focus stays on the political narrative. Thrones fell, empires ended, democracy advanced. But if the story is that three families controlling half of Europe's golden land were systematically dispossessed through a combination of war, revolution, and legal reorganization, and that the entities which absorbed their power were central banks staffed by a different set of families, then the focus shifts. The question becomes not why did empires fall, but who benefited from the fall, and what mechanisms were put in place to ensure that the new power structure could not be challenged the way the old one was. The mechanisms that were put in place between 1914 and 1921 are still with us. Central banks issuing currency based on government debt, governments borrowing to finance spending, debt instruments traded on global markets, families and institutions that manage those markets operating across borders, immune to the kind of political disruption that destroyed monarchies. The monarchies that survived, Britain, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, did so by accepting the new arrangement. They kept their titles. They lost their treasuries, or more precisely, their treasuries were integrated into national systems that they no longer controlled. The monarchies that did not accept, Russia, Austria, Hungary, were removed. And the removal was described in political terms: revolution, war, nationalism. All true, but also incomplete, because the political events happened in an economic context, and the economic context was the creation of a new global financial system that was fundamentally incompatible with the old model of sovereign wealth held privately by dynastic families. The names changed because the families needed to be separated from their claims. Old claims held under old names are harder to absorb than claims held under new names or no names at all. This is not conspiracy. This is how legal systems work when regimes change. What makes this case unusual is the speed. 3 major royal houses in 7 years, all experiencing name changes or elimination at exactly the moment when the global financial system was being restructured. The timing is not coincidental. The restructuring required the removal of the old financial powers. The old financial powers were monarchies that had to be convinced or compelled to step aside. Some stepped aside, some were pushed, but all of them in one way or another lost control of the gold and the land. And the gold and the land were absorbed into new systems that are still operating, systems that most people do not question because the story they were told was about politics, not economics, about war and revolution, not about debt instruments and central bank reorganizations. The story you were told is that King George changed his name because British people did not like German names during the war. That story is true. It is also a very small part of a much larger story. The larger story is about how the financial architecture of the modern world was built on the ruins of dynastic wealth, and how the families that built that architecture made sure the ruins stayed ruins. If you found this useful, share it with someone who asks uncomfortable questions about who actually controls the money. Because that is how this kind of analysis spreads. Not through institutions, not through official channels, but through people who cannot stop noticing that the stories we are told are always smaller than the evidence suggests they should be. Stay curious, stay skeptical, stay informed.